Okay, so I have gathered some questions for Hannah tonight, but I do want to let you know that after I move through some of these questions, you'll be invited to ask any of your own. So you can feel free to jot those down as you are listening to this dialogue. So Hannah, you were ordained in the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of the United Methodist Church in 2012 and are currently serving as Wesley Director at University of Arizona in Tucson. You just showed us the beautiful mountains there. You've served in 6 different annual conferences, so seen quite a large spectrum of our church. And in 2016, you published a book called The Shout, Finding the Prophetic Voice in Unexpected Places. Now, these are things that we can Google about you, but could you give us something more specific about your ministerial footprint and share with us more about who you are?
Sure. So yeah, I'm just a girl from Pennsylvania who has been trying to be faithful. And I mean, I say that in jest, but it's actually quite true. I am just trying to be faithful. I think when I started out in ministry, it was during a time when we were very concerned about the crisis of young clergy, as they called it, and how few of us there were. And there was a lot of pressure on us and a lot of conversation about numbers and this word effectiveness. And I think that I never felt comfortable with that. And faithfulness has always been my goal. And I think that's what has set me apart a lot of the time. I felt a call when I was early in college to, some of my youth that I was working with asked me what I felt called to do with my life. And I said this. And I have been unpacking what the word "this" means for every year since then in a new and a deeper way. I never would have imagined that my life would take the path that it has. I grew up very conservative in a United Methodist congregation that was very opposed to women clergy, refused to have them in their pulpit, that was very opposed to people like myself, who I was once called a false prophetess Jezebel in a to the whole church email, very opposed to the existence within our church of beautiful queer folks like myself. And so I think that I never would have imagined the path that I have taken, and the only way that I could have taken it is by focusing not on measures of effectiveness, not on the approval of the world or the church even, but on faithfulness, because this is a journey that only God could have taken me on, and not one that I would have set out for myself. So with that said, I think that my journey has really been determined by a passion to dismantle white supremacy within myself and within the church. That journey began, I think, at a young age, but definitely intensified when I went to college in South Carolina, which was the seat of the Confederacy, where many people said the South will rise again, and very much found myself defined in contrast to that. And so I think that has been the journey that I've been on in terms of growing ever deeper into that. So I have, to give the facts, I've served congregations on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, down near Princess Anne, and there in Lancaster, I served Faith UMC on Lidditz Pike, Fruitvale Pike in Lidditz, and I've served in Wilmington, Delaware, in New Jersey, in Texas, and now in Arizona. And half of the churches that I've served have been predominantly white congregations, and half of the churches that I've served, I have been serving under a Black senior pastor at a Black church. And so my career has been very mixed in that sense. And that's where I've done the most learning, and that's also where I wasn't exactly paid in those positions, and so I think it's but it is where I did the most learning. So that's a broad oversweep.
Yeah.
I am where I am. I'll say I am where I am now because I worked in Texas for 3 or 4 years. And the last 2 years that I was there, I was working both in Houston, curating a community called The Shout, which is a spoken word arts and justice collective movement kind of thing. The shout is the first word of Isaiah 58. Shout, do not hold back, lift up your voice like a trumpet. And so I think a lot of my life has been trying to live out Isaiah 58. And so that's kind of been, you can follow my life and see Isaiah 58 being the common thread. I hope that holds things together. And so the shout was I went back and forth for the last 2 years. I was in Texas, coordinating the shout in urban Houston, while also coordinating the movement for justice for Sandra Bland in rural Waller County, Texas, where I served under the leadership of Reverend Sean Nickelberry at Hope African Methodist Episcopal Church, where she was arrested. And ultimately, I decided to come here to Arizona because after Trump's election, I had a lot of close calls. And I didn't think I would live through his presidency, to be quite honest. And so this was a choice to live, and I think the right choice.
Well, thank you. Gosh, I could unpack so much of what you just said there, but I almost want to scrap these questions and just follow up to that. But what I'm hearing is that, you know, you are no stranger to struggle and to following God's call, no matter how much that requires you to be courageous, or no matter how that stretches you. And a lot of that comes through in the shout in your writing. So I want to read a quote from your book, and then ask you to more specifically talk about what racial justice looks like. So the quote is, "Justice, like knowledge and enlightenment, emerges from God. Justice is so central to the character of God, so embedded in the heart of God, so characteristic of the nature of God, that we cannot orient our lives toward true justice without being oriented toward God. Likewise, we cannot be fully oriented toward God without pursuing justice." And then you ask your readers to describe what the word justice brings to mind. This is a lofty term that I think sometimes we're not so clear on as we think we are. So if you could speak specifically to what racial justice brings to your mind, and maybe give us a vision of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that when we think about, so if we go backwards, right, that justice is a form of worship, right? That when we enact justice, we are investing our lives in a way that communicates that we want our world to reflect the character of its creator. And if we believe its creator is just, then when we do that, that is a physical, spiritual, emotional act of worship, to give honor and glory to God by causing this world to better reflect who God is. So when we think about the ways that we, as a church, you know, when we look around our churches, when we think about the hymns that we sing and the sermons that we hear, do they reflect a just God? Do they look like a just God? Do they look like God at all? And so, you know, when we look at our imagery, there's been a lot of conversations and debates, right, about, you know, white Jesus, and different imagery and symbols that we have in the church. And, you know, the question that we ask ourselves, and I know I'm answering this question specifically within church world, right? The question that we ask ourselves is, do our images and our understandings of God, do they reflect who God is, or do they reflect who we are? Do they look like God, or do they look like us? And I think that, you know, people like to make the point that it helps us connect with God when we can connect with the imagery. But I think that there is something, to me, I'm reading right now The Politics of Jesus for a class I'm taking in Philadelphia. It's at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, so that means I wake up at 5 a.m. here and get ready for class. And The End of White Christian America is the class, and I'm reading The Politics of Jesus for that class. And I think it's another reminder, that book and that conversation is another reminder to me of the fact that Do we believe that God is an intentional God? Do we believe that God was intentional in God's choice to come in the person of Jesus Christ? Or do we think God is just sloppy and haphazard and was just like, pew, let's see who I land in, right? If we think that God is an intentional God, then we ought to do all we can to derive what we can learn from a God who chose the body of a colonized, traumatized people to enter this world into, and therefore does the way that our church focuses its attention, focuses its theology, focuses its imagery, does it reflect that intentionality on the part of God, or does it deconstruct and dismantle and demolish that intentionality of God? And so I think that a church, let's say a church that is living out racial justice is a church that is wanting to have an impact on the world that is one in which racial justice is thriving, because that is and I think it is the question of our time that Phyllis Tickle in seminary, we heard about every 500 years there's a Reformation, and Phyllis Tickle wrote a book about the emergent church, and everybody expected that this Reformation would be led by hipster white guys with guitars that were going to be doing the high holy elements in coffee shops, and it was just going to be like a merging of the sacred ancient with the new, right? And it's like, is that what we need? Is that the Reformation that we need? Is that what Christianity needs right now? I don't think so. I think that after several hundred years of entangling and enmeshing ourselves into enslavement and then the profiting from enslavement, I think that the Reformation that we need is one that must be led, in my belief, by Black women. And I believe that it's my role to be like a blocker in football, and prepare the way for them, because they are the ones that will birth the Reformation that we need, not white guys with guitars in coffee shops. Okay, I'm gonna call it quit on that question. We'll get into more stuff.
Well, I really appreciate the connection you draw between God and justice and the work of trying to achieve or create justice. It's not something that is devoid of spirit. And sometimes I think we think that we have this, it's on us to make all this happen. And there is a sense of agency and collaboration, but it's in partnership with the divine, with the spirit. So thank you for that framework. It's really helpful. So specifically,
if I can add something,
go ahead. Yeah.
Because of the work that I do, I often get called an activist. And so I will, by reporters or by church figures or whatever. And my answer is, like, I don't let people call me an activist, not because I'm opposed to activists, but because I feel like it misunderstands what I'm doing. And so when I never let somebody call me an activist without correcting them and saying, I'm a pastor. This is what it looks like for me to live out my faith. What does it look like for you to live out yours? This is a spiritual journey. And not everybody is a Christian. Not everybody is, but for those of us that are, this is a spiritual journey. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and you're saying that, if ours is a God of justice, then as God's people made in God's likeness, that we also, like, if we claim the identity of Christian, should be, justice should be central to our sense of faith, whether we're out on the street or we're, however we are showing up in that work.
Yes, so if I can add one more thing.
Yes,
sorry.
Please.
But like along those lines, like, what voices are we listening to? What books are we reading? For me, I don't read books by white men anymore, not because I don't think white men have anything to say, but because I've read hundreds of books by white men, right? I had to get through college and grad school, and most of us have, right? And so most of the books I read now are by Black women. I'm very intentional about that because it's not that, like, it's not that other voices have nothing to say. It's just that we've been listening to them so much for so long. it's okay. It's appropriate to invest our energy and our attention in other ways.
Well, then I want to follow up to that and ask, who are you reading? Who are the authors that you are right now just captivated by?
Oh, I have a whole stack over there. Well, right now, I'm trying to read the books that everybody's reading, because I think it's good to like read those books, like for to be informed about what other people are reading and thinking, right? So everybody's reading White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. So I'm trying to read those to be informed about what the conversation is. I'm also reading White Rage, which is an amazing book by a Black woman which is kind of about how the conditions in this country are a result of this simmering rage that looks different than a riot. It looks like redlining. It looks like lynching. That white rage, when enacted from a position of power, it's institutionalized. The violence is institutionalized, and so I think that's. So I think if you've read White Fragility, also read White Rage. I'm after I finish reading The Politics of Jesus, I plan to read The Politics of Jesus, by Miguel de la Torre, which is a whole other conversation. And if I can make a confession, when I signed up for this class, I was like, oh, easy, I already have The Politics of Jesus, because I had the one by Yoder from seminary. And so I was so relieved. That I realized before the class started that The Politics of Jesus by O'Barry Hendricks, which is Black liberation book, different than The Politics of Jesus by Yoder. And it would be very embarrassing if I'd shown up for the end of white Christian America with a book by a white Christian American man written in however many decades ago. So I'm really glad I realized that. And so I guess I should clarify for you which Politics of Jesus I mean. It is the one by O'Barry Hendricks. There also, there is scholarship on the end of white Christian America, which I may make an exception. It's by a white man, but I'll maybe make an exception for that. But anything by Dr. Will Gaffney, Womanist Midrash, Miriam's Daughters. So those are kind of in my stack right now. I always have much bigger stack than I can handle.
Yep.
As do we all, I'm sure. This is Grandview. I know you all have a much bigger stack than you can handle. I know you guys.
We like to read, like to be informed, for sure. So speaking to, you touched a little bit on some of the work you've done, and I especially am curious about some more of the details about the work you did with Justice for Sandra Bland. So if you would talk about some of the hands-on work of dismantling racism that you've been a part of, and what you've learned along the way in terms of what it means to be useful, showing up as a white woman, and often the only white person in rooms in these dialogues. So talk about the work you've done and what you've learned about usefulness.
Yeah, I'm writing down a couple of things so I don't forget them because they're important. And my mind can only handle so many things at once. So first of all, I would say that I've kind of been living my life by a certain set of rules. And so like among those are that since I was in school, I've refused to be a part of any, kind of like, unless they are intentionally white people workspaces, right, where we are doing white people work to dismantle racism, I've refused to be a part of any groups that were white only. And so that means I've had the opportunity to really challenge and push folks, like ever since I graduated from seminary, and I would be invited to join like leadership cohorts, right? Spaces where like young, promising leaders are invited to join in order to, network, grow, all those things. And if they were white only spaces, I refused to join. And that prompted conversation within those spaces, right? So I would tell them, I would not only refuse to join, but tell them why, right? And so I think that kind of, I think those are things that prompted conversations in other spaces, right? And that means I missed out, right? I didn't miss out. Let me tell you how glad I am that I have invested my time and my life the way that I have. If I had taken a different path, I'd be a different person. I'm very glad for the way I've invested my time, but I missed out on opportunities, right? And not really. And so I found you can't have it both ways, right? If you're investing your time in that way, you're not investing your time in this way. And so because I didn't invest my time in these kind of elite white only spaces, it means I was investing my time in the streets instead, and investing my time. And when I say the streets, I mean the movement. I mean the conversations that happen on the block. I mean the organic community. So just to clarify what I mean, because I say that a lot. And so I think that, yes, being careful about, intentional about how I invested my time and my membership per se. And I think that one thing, just for y'all's context, that was interesting, this is kind of a side rabbit trail, but being in, maybe not, being in Lancaster, when I was serving a church in Leaditz, you know, whenever I would go, when I'd be at work and I would go down and have to go down to a meeting in the city, right? In the city, so far away from Fruitville Pike. When I had to go down to meetings in the city at Methodist churches that were in the city proper, I received a lot of opposition from my church members, people begging me to let them go with me, that I wouldn't be safe, that I wouldn't make it back alive. And I'm like, you guys, I live on Orange Street. Like, you guys know I live there, right? And so I think that that was very eye-opening for me. In terms of how we see one another, so relevant to y'all's location, right? The spaces that I've lived in, like the spaces that I physically have lived in, make Lancaster City look like, you know, a country club. You know, it's nothing to be scared of, and yet people surrounding it were even scared of Lancaster City. Like, it boggles my mind, and maybe that's something we can discuss later on. So I think that another thing that's been important to the ways that I've shown up is staying till the end. What I learned is that, you know, like as white folks, we often, I think I kind of, my path got affected by the fact that I would choose, like if I went to a district training, right? And there's a workshop on advocacy with Latinx churches. I would choose that one, right? And then I remember being at one it was in North Carolina, not Eastern Pennsylvania, where I did that. And I was the only person who chose it. And the workshop leaders who'd driven like 5 hours to come and lead it just burst into tears and left the room, right? So being intentional about the voices that we're choosing to listen to and the effort that people put in to teach us. And so I think that being intentional about the spaces and how we invest our time has made a big difference in this hands-on work, but also staying till the end. So when I say staying till the end, I mean that, like, I would often go to meetings, organizing meetings, protests, etc. And at a certain hour, the respectable white people leave. Either because it's bedtime, they have work in the morning, they have kids to put to bed, or to be quite honest, they're just bored and they feel like, you know, they've made an appearance, or they've taken a selfie so they can, you know, for younger folks, they've taken a selfie to put on social media, they've made their performative appearance and they leave, right? Because it's more about performing for the gaze of white people than being in relationship with people of color, right? And so I learned this interesting thing, that because I stayed until the end always, I ended up having completely different relationships with people than all the people who came and they made an appearance and then they left. They received due recompense for their effort, right? Which means that they received, you know, maybe respect from other white people, but no deepening of relationship and solidarity with people who were different from them in the community. And so I discovered that by staying till the end, I became a part of the community in a different way. And the realization that, like, those Black mamas had kids to put to bed. Those Black mamas had to be at work at 6 a.m. They had all the same reasons to leave, but they couldn't because it's actually their lives on the line. And so what does it say when we leave early about the depth of our solidarity? And so I think that that's something that's been important in terms of, you know, I'm not giving you really dramatic examples. I'm giving you like very simple things that are important to hands-on work, like the way we show up in spaces. I would say something, you asked like what I've learned about, you know, and one of the things that I've learned is, one of the things I've changed about my approach is changing my language. I used to be very much known for like the dear white people kind of, posts. Dear white people, this is what you need to work on, right? And there is a certain distancing that we want to do. I think that as white people, we very much, we want to define ourselves in opposition to conservatives when we are trying to be allies. So like, we want to define ourselves as the opposite of whatever we're trying to be, right? And so like we define ourselves in opposition to something rather than in relationship to something. And so I think that for white people, we have a tendency to want to feel like if we can separate ourselves from other white people and like we know more, we do more, etc., then like we've done enough, right? It's never enough. And so I think that what's been really, really like the most transformative thing about my journny has been shifting from you to we. So I don't say you white people. I do say you cishet white, men who don't share the platform with anybody. But shifting my language from you to we. So whenever I address white people, I say we, and I include myself because I also struggle with all the same things that everybody else does. I haven't earned my way out of being associated with whiteness, right? I have to dismantle it within myself as well as others. And so I think something really concrete in terms of dismantling racism is understanding the need to dismantle it within myself, within the communities I'm a part of, within my family, within my ministry, like not just as something else somewhere else, but always within, which means holding on to that we language always instead of that you language.
Can I jump in actually? You had said in terms of showing up for planning meetings or organizing meetings, that there are some that would tend to, I think you said, performing for the gaze of white people instead of being in relationship. Can you just unpack kind of what like that gaze is? You kind of did a little bit, but just say more about that if you can.
Yeah, so that gaze, I think the epitome of that is kind of like the joke that my friends and I have been saying is like that the expectation is that eventually Adam Hamilton is going to write a book about how to be an anti-racist, and every Methodist will be required to buy it and read it. It is this sense in which the powers that be are still determining, so like somebody like me who is engaged in the work is not the expert for the institution, because the institution is going to look towards people that aren't going to threaten the institution, right? And so that's a piece of it. But also, so when I say that, I mean that we're going to listen to voices that don't require us to change. They might require us to do some intellectual work, but not sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And so that's a piece of it, is how the white gaze controls the conversation about, anti-racism even now. Previous to this, in the previous chapter, the chapter between Martin Luther King's assassination and up to now, the language that we've used to control the situation has been reconciliation. And so the word reconciliation is how white people have controlled the conversation about racism and made it something that still benefits them. I can speak more to that if you want. I can write books about it. Dr. Jennifer Harvey actually already has. But her book is Dear White Christians, for Those Still Longing for Racial Reconciliation. A very important book. So right now, the white gaze is that we still want to control what it means to be an anti-racist. So for instance, I saw somebody posting recently, like somebody had been critical of the Black Lives Movement, and they were like, oh no, you have to understand, it's like the Black lives, it's okay, we're different than them, right? Like we're just saying Black lives, we're just painting Black Lives Matter in the street. We're just we're just putting Black Lives Matter signs on our churches, but don't connect us with the Black Lives Matter movement and the fact that they care about queer people and Palestine and all these other things. Like, you know, like, don't actually listen to Black people. We're still running the conversation. And so in that sense, the ways that white people show up to these events is often to, in the way that the other white people, like, the goal is to separate oneself from other white people by doing more. Like, first is distance myself from other white people by doing more. And then secondly, perform that doing more for them so that they know that I'm better than them. Neither of those does anything to save Black lives. And so, you know, I think that my professional life has been very difficult because I'm kind of difficult, let's be honest. But in general, I'm not gonna lie. But in general, it's because, like, my accountability is from people of color. So if what I say or what I do is not approved of by white people, it matters not a bit to me, because white people are not the experts on racism. We are the ones who commit it. We can never be the experts on it, except in being the experts on committing it. No matter how much we learn and how much we know, we will always still be struggling with being the committers of it, right? And so my accountability, who I look to tell me whether what I've said or done is right, is Black women. And I think that makes me very hard to deal with for white institutional powers, because I don't care if they disagree with me or see me as too extreme, because my goal is the survival and the thriving of Black people. I don't care if they approve or think that I'm too extreme, because my goal is not their approval. And I think that is, you know, for white people, we want to push just so far that maybe we feel a little bit of emotional catharsis. We like to feel guilt. We like to feel tears. We like to feel grief about what we've done or people who look like us have done. What we don't want is to push beyond that initial pain to the pain that costs us our salaries and our livelihoods, and requires real sacrifice, requires us to say at work, you know, thank you for offering me this raise, but the last 5 raises that you've offered have been to other white men. I really have to turn down this raise, and strongly encourage you to give this raise to a Black woman. And if you don't, I'm going to make public that we had this conversation and that you refused to give the raise to the Black woman who deserved it, right? Now, if you did that, you might lose your job. If she does that, she's definitely going to lose her job. And what we've been doing for way too long is we've been leaving her alone to have that conversation, leaving her alone to look like the crazy, angry woman who speaks up and says, angry Black woman, right? Who speaks up and says, why did you give it to 5 white men and not to me, right? Because we left her alone. We deserted her. We took all the benefits, and we saw the problems too, but we didn't do anything about it. We let her have to speak up for herself when we saw what was going wrong, and we didn't do anything. Sorry, I'm getting a little heated now. So that's the white gaze.
No, I appreciate your genuine presence about it, and the way you speak with the urgency. I got halfway through the questions I had, but I want to open up the floor to others who have questions of their own. I'll start with this one that I got. You've been speaking a lot about Black women, and why not Black men, I suppose, or why do you single out this, you know, particular grouping of people?
Yeah, I think that's the community that I am invested in. So I've had like 3 conversations with Black men today too. So it's not like, it's not, but that's my community of accountability. That's the community that I'm invested in. That doesn't mean that I don't. But it does mean that when we talk about intersectionality, that intersectionality is not just like, it's not just like adding like the oppression that women experience and the oppression that Black men experience, and then you like add those and that's what Black women experience. It's more like you multiply it, and it's a whole other thing. And the Black women are experiencing multiple levels, right? And that's why there is a need for womanism. And so for me, if I'm going like right to the source, like right to the root of the deepest levels of oppression in our nation, it's going to be Indigenous and Black women who experience injustice in a different way than everybody else does, on a deeper level. And so, if I want to really get to the root of things, those are the voices that I'm going to focus on listening to. It doesn't mean that I don't listen to other voices, but that's where I'm focusing, A, and also B. That's what my community is. I'm in a Black sorority, and I'm part of Black women's preaching groups. Those are not spaces that like I sought to infiltrate. They're spaces that adopted me, because the work that I've done has made me consistently so rejected by the worlds and the spaces that should have been spaces that I could survive in. Black women really scooped me up off of the floor and said, "You're with us now. Nobody else wants you. You're with us now." And that's where my community is. So that was their choice. They chose me.
Thank you for that explanation. Unless anything else shows up in the chat, I'm going to ask another one that shows up on my list. So right now, there's a lot of well-intentioned allies, a lot of well-intentioned people who inadvertently cause harm. So how have you seen this happen, and how do you think we might avoid inadvertently causing harm?
Sure. So I think that the ways that we, and I'm going to kind of do a combination of this question and the one you had on list before it, because they're kind of how to be a non-useful ally and how to be a useful ally are kind of two sides of the coin, right? And so I would say that that an ally is within the movement for racial justice. Ally is not a name that you can take on yourself. There is some nuances there, like I've seen within the work, within movements for LGBTQ justice, right? That it seemed to be a little more permissible for people to label themselves ally. But within racial justice work, you ally, and perhaps in general, maybe it's just more acceptable in queer justice spaces, or there's a difference between LGBTQ and queer spaces. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, the politics of queerness, blah, blah, blah. So I would say it would be, in queer justice spaces, it would probably be equally inappropriate to label oneself an ally. Ally is a word other people call you. It's not a word you call yourself. It is, and one of my friends, Dr. Alicia Lola Jones, who is an ethnomusicologist, who just put out another book, if you want another book for your list, called Flaming, the Theopoetics of Black Gospel Performance, I think. It's a long time, but yeah, something like that. And it is about what you would think it's about, and so she's amazing. But Dr. Alicia Lola Jones, she said recently that you only know whether somebody was an ally in death. Whew. Which is pretty extreme, right? And so I think that we get a lot into language lately, right? About like, what's the right word? Is it ally? Is it accomplice? Is it anti-racist, right? And I think the most important thing about being a useful or non-useful ally is not what words you use or what language you use or what experience or education you use, but your sincerity. Like, your sincerity. Is your intent truly to end the killing of Black people? and the disrespecting of Black people within our theological, political, educational spaces? Is that really your goal? Is that your sincere goal? Or is it to perform for the gaze of others, to, during moments when we're living in a moment where being racist has become popular, to the extent that people who are probably pretty toxic and dangerous are going to be lifted up as the models, because there's power, because it's cool right now. And so, like, are you doing it with sincerity? I think that's like the most important thing. Are you doing it with sincerity? If you're doing it with sincerity, then you probably are going to want to, listen to the people who are impacted by injustice, and find your answers there. I think one thing that we kind of saw, so I'll give you like a little example, and let's take a deep breath, because I'm really intense. First, okay, let's take a deep breath, and also, how long are we going, Liz? Is this another 10
I think like 8 to 8:10, like, but that would be like a hard and fast stop time. So maybe around like 8:05, so we can pray together and have that deep breath continue.
So first of all, let's take a deep breath, because I've been like at you for a while. Okay, so everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. Hannah's not here to hurt us. So I guess that what I wanted to say is what is our purpose? What is our sincerity? And so this example that I'm going to share is going to be kind of hard for people to hear. Is that okay? Are we okay with that? Okay. So the example for me of like well-intentioned allies kind of messing things up, right, is like right after Trump's election, we had the Women's March. And for those of us who had been in the streets, like by 2016, we had been in the streets heavy for like a few years by that point, in the Black Lives Matter and other movements. We'd been in the streets heavily, right? Maybe going back even further, you have Occupy and things like that. So there'd been a lot of people who had been in the streets for a long time, were very tired, very experienced, very tired. And so when the Women's March rose up, I think a lot of us were kind of looking at it and thinking, what is this, right? Is this, and my lens for it was this: I want to see, what do these women do when they go home? Do they go home, and do they find, Miss Ellen, who has been working in their neighborhood, grinding away for decades, who's in her 70s, 80s, and she has just been fighting for the children her whole life, right? And do they go to her and do they say, how can I come beside you or behind you? How can I help? I'm so sorry that I didn't show up until now, right? Or do they go to Miss Ellen and do they say, I'm starting a movement and I need your help to, do this grunt work for the movement that I'm leading? This is hard for a lot of women to hear. And a lot of cities around the country, a few cities got it right, but a lot of cities did a lot of damage to the women who are really tired. And so I think that that's the thing, is like, do well-intentioned allies, that well-intentioned, best intentions, the path to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Intentions within movement spaces, that word intentions is like a dirty word. The word intentions is a dirty word within movement spaces, because a lot of people want to bring it up as a reason for the harm that they're doing. And so I think that that would be kind of an example of like, are we asking people, what do they need? So real quick breakdown, the difference between charity and solidarity. You'll see a lot of different models for this, but this is my simplest one to understand. So the difference between charity and solidarity is who defines the problem, who defines the solution, and who defines the accountability. So if you've been You know, if you've been predominantly people who are enacting or benefiting from injustice, you're probably not the ones to define the problem. It's probably the ones who experience the injustice that need to define the problem, that need to define the solution, and that need to define. So charity is what the church has been doing predominantly since the age of Constantine, I think. Accumulating the resources and then deciding how they will distribute them to the people, right? Whereas solidarity is, that's more like in the reparations line of thought, right? That's more like along the lines of going to people to ask what for them to lead, not for us to lead and make the decisions. Yeah, sincerity. The way to be a good ally is sincerity, because if our sincere goal is to stop Black death and to make it so that BIPOC, and when I say BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color. I'll explain that real quick. Sidebar, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. The reason why lately people have been separating out Black and Indigenous is because we have a tendency to have erased the people who are experiencing the deepest levels of suffering and injustice on a deeper level. We erase them by saying, we need people of color in this space, right? And then, like, we don't include Black and Indigenous people. We you know, or, you know, and so, but we say, well, we have people of color. It's an act of erasure. And so by using the word BIPOC, they've drawn out Black and Indigenous to remind people that Black and Indigenous people experience death and injustice on a different level. People aren't being shot because they're from Korea. It's a different kind of injustice, right? And so that's when you see that word BIPOC, that's why. I feel like I've lost my train of thought in explaining BIPOC now, Liz. Sincerity. Okay, sincerity. If our sincere goal is to end racism within ourselves and our communities, then if somebody gives us feedback and tells us, like, you know, that's not really helpful, it's not really useful what you're doing, then if sincerity is our guide, if faithfulness is our guide, then our egos won't be caught up in it, right? And our feelings, it won't be caught up in it, right? And we'll be like, okay, my goal is to stop racism. You have given me a gift. You've given me a gift because you're helping me know how to do it better, right? Whereas if somebody gives us feedback about how we're messing up, to be quite honest, and we either run away, we say, well, I'm never trying this again. I was trying to help you, and you weren't nice to me about it, and I'm never trying this again. We got a lot of that at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement back in like 2013. A lot of that, right? Or just kind of feeling like embarrassed and I'm just gonna go home now and I'm never gonna show up again, right? Or just refusing to listen and keep doing things the way we want, right? Like if our goal is sincerely to end racism, then we'll be able to hear critique and grow from it. A lot of times, like, I'm pretty aggressive and I'm pretty straight with white folks, and white folks get pretty mad at me, and I'm like, can you imagine the journey I've been on to learn this? I'm giving it to you guys easy. Like, this is the easy version. And so, and my goal is, like, if folks will listen to me, then they'll be able to show up in a way that's useful and that's going to save Black folks and Indigenous folks and Latinx folks. It's going to save them years of emotional labor. Like, if you'll listen to the things I'm saying, you can, like, it's not only going to help you to be useful, but it's going to save them so much energy. And it's like a gift that keeps on giving, because the more willing we are to receive feedback and to learn, the more energy gets conserved for them, right? People have invested deeply in me, obviously, right? Like, people have been deeply investing in me. People have held on to my calling. The way that I put it is, like, they have held on to my calling with fingers that gripped till the knuckles were white, right? people did not let me walk away from my calling. Since I was 7 years old, they have gripped on and I have tried to escape. I have tried to be that white person that walked away. I have tried so hard, and they wouldn't let me go. So they have invested deeply in me, and I plan to pass that along. The energy that they put into me, I don't want them to have to put that into every person, right? So how can we work together so to save them some energy? I sure hope something I've said has been useful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I hear you in that last bit talking about how, it's sincerity and solidarity are how we measure what we're doing, above performance and charity. So even just thinking about that in terms of how we interrogate ourselves and when we're showing up, are we showing up with sincerity and from a spirit of solidarity, as opposed to performance and charity? That's really helpful. And to not let our egos get in the way when intention and impact don't align. If somebody calls out our impact, even though we had those good intentions, to not run away, but to take that as the gift it is to learn and to show up again with that knowledge, and to appreciate, as hard as it is in the moment to hear that you're not doing something right, or you said something hurtful or shown up in a hurtful way, to come back again is the real way to, if reconciliation is the goal, someday, and after a whole lot of things like reparations you're talking about, the continual showing up, to me at least, is what I think I hear you saying. Dana Weil had a question she wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Hannah, I was wondering if you had any kind of like nuggets or reflections on sort of this like living in a system of white supremacy, right? But also trying to like dismantle it at the same time. So like I'm in education, right? So like it's totally hierarchical and totally based off of, old institutional like ways of being. And so you're in it, and that you're also trying to like dismantle it. And like, for example, I was like trying to talk to someone about some anti-racism work, and they were sort of blowing me off. And then I gave them my litany of things I've been doing in anti-racism work since 2004. And now they're paying attention to what I have to say. And I'm like, I hate that I have to like validate this. Like I shouldn't need, because that's so like white supremacist to need to like have someone's resume before you listen to them. Right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, do you have any like nuggets or reflections on like living in this system as you're trying to dismantle the system?
Yeah, I'm not very good at it, I'll tell you that. And what I mean by that is that I'm always a little bit suspect if somebody's like in a high position of power within an institution and seen as an expert on this, because I really do think that we need to be pushing hard enough that we pay a price for it. And so if I was recently seeing somebody was like the dean of a cathedral and was like, going to be speaking on this. And I was kind of like, I'm not sure you can be in that position, to be quite honest, and be pushing as hard as you need to be pushing. I think that there's like an element within institutional life in which people push hard enough that they are performing for the white gaze, right? And where they are seen as like, oh, wow, they're justice focused, right? But they're not pushing hard enough that it costs them something. And so I think that's, when I say I'm bad at it, what I mean is I live on the margins of institutional life, because so I think that join us here on the margins. It's fun. But yeah, so I think there's things you have control of and things you don't. And so I think, if you're an educator, if you have a classroom space, do you?
I'm a school counselor, so
you have a counseling space.
Yep, I have. Yep, and lots of advocacy for kids.
Right. So, I think that, there's ways that you have control. There's things you have control of and things you don't. And you have control of your space and what are the imagery that people see in that space, right? So for me, as a university chaplain, I have like, imagery, right, that is dismantling racism. So I think that you have control of that space. I think that I have grown over time to in my old age, I'll be honest, you might laugh, but it feels like that. In my old age, I'm trying to learn to be more strategic. I have reached a point where I'm like, okay, my goal is not to die. I think I'm supposed to live. And so what do I do with that? How do I be strategic? And Liz and Andrea can tell you that I'm working at like, how do we organize strategically? And so I think like finding people within your space that are going to be doing that with you, and looking for the sincerity. So like, I think somebody who is going to be a good accomplice, it's not about how much experience they have or education they have in this area. Some of the most dangerous, toxic, like racist, damaging, abusive people are experts in anti-racism, are people with PhDs in it. That kind of expertise is a piece of white supremacy, right? And so like looking around in your institutional space and finding the people who have sincerity. I struggle with that, Dana, and I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but I struggle with like wanting to be in conversation with like the people who I'm like, you could do so much good if you would change, right? Like I really like struggle so I'm trying to shift my focus, and this is just me being real personal with you guys right now. I'm trying to shift my focus right now from putting so much of my energy on like trying to call in the people with like the big platforms or the people who are being really problematic, or, you know, trying to shift and give that a little bit of energy and give more of my energy to the people who really have sincerity of desire to do the good work, and not to police the performativeness of these folks, but to find the sincerity. And it might be, you know, it might be people you never noticed, you never thought to notice. And so I would say like, look for the people that you didn't notice, and also, you know, within your space, there's always opportunities. If you work in a space that has any BIPOC folks, there's always opportunities to take some blows, save them some, you know, if there's things that need to be said in a meeting that could get you in trouble or get you fired, but somebody needs to say it instead of them saying it.
Do that for kids. Like, it's like, the kid's not going to survive. Like I could lose my job, I will land on my feet. But if this kid, like, it could be life or death for them.
Yeah.
You know?
So I guess what I'm saying is like, I think that we have this image in our head of what it needs to look like, right? And I think like being creative, I honestly think that like the movement, it's underground, guys. Like the way we're going to change this, like, yes, we need to disrupt things. We need to yell in the streets. Yeah, all that. But I also think that there's ways that within institutional life, we're going to before people figured out who I was extremely effective in Trojan horsing spaces. So I walk into a space, I got a little blonde bob and a little suit. People have no idea what's about to happen to them, right? And so like Trojan horse, like, you know, Trojan horse as many spaces as you can until people figure out what you're up to, because they don't expect it from us. And so use that, you know. I think that it sounds like you're already doing a great job with that with kids, and, you know, and just figuring out how to apply it within the institutional structure, and knowing that there's no cookies and there's no rewards and there's no crowns and there's no bonuses, like that the reward is in actually dismantling racism. There's no other reward besides that.
Pastor, you've been in different roles here with both the Black Lives Matter and with Sandra Bland, and also with the LGBT community. And I'm wondering, how do those two things sort of intermesh, or what are the parallels that go with being a leader in both of those areas?
Yeah, so I think sometimes people feel like I'm changing the channel. Like people are like, oh, now she's in Arizona doing immigration work. I'm like, you guys, this is all dismantling white supremacy. It's all the same thing. And I think it kind of helps when we, perhaps the language of heteropatriarchal white supremacy, I think helps to get the full picture of the system that we're trying to dismantle. And so I think, all injustices are connected, I think. And the system that we are seeking to dismantle affects the same system. So for instance, the same system that feels a need to control the bodies of women, that feels the need to control the bodies of queer folks, is the same system that feels the need to control the bodies of Black folks. It is heteropatriarchal white supremacy. So when we say white supremacy, there is ways that I both benefit from white supremacy. There's ways that I benefit from it as a white woman. There's ways that I resist it. There's ways that I am complicit in it. But I think that I think that it's a different situation for the folks that have created, who have been the architects of the system. So we have to be honest about, like, white women have been accomplices in creating the system, but the architects of the system have been cis het white men. And therefore they have tried to destroy all the things that aren't that. So trans, queer,
Right.
So all the things that are not that are the things that they need to destroy and keep all those different groups turned against each other. And so that's part of the myth, is that if we convince the people that we're trying to destroy that actually they're destroying each other, and we keep them turned against each other, then they'll never figure out that if they got together, they could defeat us. And so part of the thing is to convince people that these different struggles are separate instead of the same thing. That's how a system of minority rule continues to thrive, is by making people think that all these things are disconnected when they're all very much related and intertwined. The dog is up.
Esperanza.
Any other questions?
I feel like this is like a group, like a Grandview, not just like a Hannah question. So like I moved to Lancaster at the same time that that transition out of college to young adulthood, where community is hard to build, community is so natural in high school and college, and then you get in these silos of work, and so anyway, so I didn't really do a good job, I think, of plugging into and creating a diverse community and friendships for myself when I moved to Lancaster, because I'm in education, which is mostly white people. So, and then I've struggled with the idea of not necessarily entering a space that I'm not fully invited to, right? Like imposing I need Black friends, I'm gonna start going to a Black church. I don't know, like that. So I have not done well since moving to Lancaster. So I just didn't know as a community in Lancaster, it's just me, a personal thing. So people that are still on might also be feeling the same way. So that's just my personal thing. I don't know what feedback I'm looking for other than that is what I'm stewing on.
Well, and I definitely invite people who have ideas or suggestions for what has been helpful to you in that setting to share them. But one thing that I want to say initially is that what this cis heteropatriarchal white supremacist system looks like, and the ways that it changes on location, right? So I'm in Arizona now. A huge chunk of our state is Navajo Nation, right? The justice and a very, very, very tiny percentage of this state is Black, very tiny. And so the justice issues that are being meted out are, you know, indigenous and immigrant, right? And so it kind of like the ways that we show up in terms of dismantling changes by you know, it doesn't utterly there's different ways that there's different things that our contexts require of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it, you know, I do know, I've lived there. I know that Lancaster can be a bit of a struggle in that sense. And I also think that hopefully, and Tucson is a struggle in the same way, that hopefully there are opportunities that are being offered to show up in solidarity with people. And you know, taking those offers and understanding that yes, relationships are important to who we are and who we are becoming, but like you said, also like we cannot walk through the world being like, I need a Black friend, dear Lord. And so, you know, but showing up in the world in a way that communicates that you love and value Black lives. Like I think that somebody was asking me this question today in relation to like Seattle, Portland, kind of very white areas today, and about their church. And I think the thing that I said was that churches need to not be so frantic about like feeling bad that they're not diverse enough and that people aren't coming into their church, and they need to ask themselves, are they going out to the people, because we are a community that's sent out. And so I would just say that with any space, whether it's our friend group, whether it's our church, you know, like I would really encourage people to shift their attention away from shame about the lack of diversity in their spaces and towards instead asking themselves whether they are living in sacrificial solidarity, like more work of like yourself and what can you control about yourself. And maybe when a congregation is doing that, maybe they become more diverse, or maybe they're seen by diverse people as a congregation that's really showing up for them and really loves them. And both are good things, right? And so I think that like diversity, it shouldn't be our goal. I think solidarity should be our goal. And sometimes diversity comes as a result of solidarity, and sometimes it doesn't, depending on the space that we're in. And like you said, Dana, like sometimes people need some space apart and we don't want to like invade it. Like I'm super careful about that, right? Like sometimes there'll be like a gathering of Black clergy women and I'll have a friend who's like, come on, just come in the room. No, come on, you're welcome. And I'm like, you want me there, but she will feel uncomfortable if I'm there, and I'm not going to ruin the experience for her, right? And so like I'm very careful. Like I've served in 3 Black churches, I'm in a Black sorority, and sometimes I deny myself spaces of camaraderie because I don't want to be that person who's ruining it for the people who don't know me and don't know they can trust me. And do you know what I mean? So yeah, diversity shouldn't be our goal, I don't think. Yeah, but when we're performing for the white gaze, right, in order to be people that, for the white gaze, we need to have pictures with Black children on mission trips and pictures with our Black friends. Like, you know what Black people are telling me after like George Floyd and everything? They're like, why are all our friends like suddenly posting pictures of themselves with us, or like changing their profile picture to like a picture of them with their Black friend? They're not doing that for Black people. Like they're doing that for the white gaze. And so I think that you should ask yourself, am I showing up in sacrificial solidarity? And if you are, like have the confidence to stand in that and not let whether the white gaze approves of you or not determine whether you are showing up for people. Anyway, if anybody else has ideas about what to do locally in Lancaster, there you go.
Marianne, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah.
You're so sweet. Yeah.
I just, maybe it's to play the devil's advocate a little bit, but I just wonder, you know, thinking about language and about the whole idea of dismantling this whole hierarchical system that we're in, and thinking about the love of power that white men have, or that I'm not, and that's a generalization, I didn't really mean it that way, but when you talk about the dismantling, that is like, I'm just thinking, you know, what a threatening kind of language that is for this whole system that is going to be, if it's dismantled, it takes away the power of the people that want to hold on to it. So, and again, not that we have to make it pretty, you know, or not that the movement has to make it acceptable, because it's not acceptable, the things that have been done to Black people for years and years. But do you know what I'm talking about? Just the kind of the threatening nature of it, and how, you know, you're going to come up against, I guess you're going to come up against roadblocks, whether you're being nice and have nice language or you're not. And I just, you know, just kind of wanted to know about your take on that. And then the one other question I had was how I'm retired now, and again, feeling a little like Dana was feeling, that I can get stuck in the kind of shame and the kind of sorrow for what, you know, people have gone through and what are going through, but I'm not in the situation where I feel like I can do very much about it. You know, I can become aware, which is what I'm becoming more aware. But you know, those are real issues. Like if you're retired or you're in a situation where you're not working, you're kind of plunked in your retired life, I guess. But anyway, those are just a couple of things I wanted to bring up.
Well, first of all, I think that older women who organize amongst themselves are the most powerful force on earth. And people will listen to you in a way that they won't listen to me. And I know that might seem ironic, right? Because culturally, we don't necessarily center the voices of older women, but locally, within communities, within the communities that we most need to transform, they are going to listen to you in a way that they won't listen to me. And I do think that older women organized could just turn the world upside down. Like and that's why I love, you know, the United Methodist Women, because I think that, you know, if deployed properly, like, you know, you are the ones who can, and I think I'm careful to say women and not white women, because I think we've been seeing that conversation taking place in Portland of like the mothers, and then suddenly it's like the wall of mothers is protecting the children, and it's wonderful, it's good they're doing that, but it also harkens back to this very racist trope from my childhood of, you'd always see like the poor Black children in Africa and we need to save them, and they are our children and we need to feed them. But the other side of that is we are implying that their own mothers don't love them enough and can't take care of them. And so our focus is on the children. And so like when I see a line of white mothers being like, these are our children, we are protecting them. And I know that older Black women have been there since the beginning. I'm like, what is going on here? I don't think we completely see all the layers of what's going on, right? And so I'm careful to say women, because I think it would be, you know, great if like cross-racially y'all were organizing, right? And so that's, you know, that's one thing is, Marianne, I just want to say, like, I think that you actually have unlimited potential, and like harness that, like, you know, because that I really believe that is the most powerful force on earth. Like, I really believe that. That older women who have decided they've had enough of this BS and decide to organize themselves and that they're going to change the world, I believe is the most powerful force on earth. So that's, I keep repeating it because I really believe it, And I think the other thing when you're talking about the language, like, I think that the reality for me is like, I really do want to dismantle it. I really do want to burn it all down. Like, and so I think that, and I think what I'm hearing from you is like, are you saying that when we use strong language, it might make people like less prone to act on it or to listen? Sorry,
no, that's okay. What I was thinking about, I mean, I'm married to a white man, we are going to be electing, the election is going to be between two white men, you know, and you want to believe that there is some goodness left in, you know, I grew up in a household of men. I mean, it's just, you know, I guess there we have, I just feel like there has to be some working within a system.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm not getting everything of what you mean about dismantling.
Yeah, so maybe this will help. Like for me, I think that I have a wonderful brother who's a white man, who's a
Yeah,
cis
right.
man. And you know, I think that you know, I'm on the, it's kind of like I'm at the point where I want to dismantle systems that benefit me over my Black sisters, right? So like when I did the work that I did for Sandra Bland, it's because they live in a different world than I live in. And it's because I am safe driving the roads in a way that they aren't. And I didn't want to be safer than them anymore, right? So it's like this deep level of like, I don't want this. I don't want to be benefiting, right? And so like, I think that that is the option that I wrote a blog recently. It's called Dear White Men, We Need You, Just Not There. And it is basically saying like, we do need you. There is stuff for you to do, just like there's stuff for me to do, but we don't need you out front. You've been there too long. You've been talking too long. We've been listening to you for too long. You are welcome. You are welcome, and you are needed, and you are wanted. But in order for us to get to where we need to go, one of the analogies that I used in that blog was just because the teacher assigned you to lead the line going out to recess doesn't mean you should lead it if you don't know where the playground is. Like, you can say, hey, somebody else should lead the line. I don't know where we're going. But instead, they keep leading, right? And so like, we will not get to justice. We will not get to the promised land if people continue to lead who accept that leadership because the world has assigned them to that role. This heteropatriarchal white supremacist system has assigned white men to that role. And my invitation to white men is, we need you. We just don't need you at the front of the line. And so there's a role for them. And so I think that like when we say dismantle, right, it doesn't mean demolish them as human beings. It means dismantle the system that has been built to create a reality in which they live in a different world than the rest of us, right? And if they want that, then they should be glad. Just like I'm glad to say, I want to destroy this world where I'm safe on the roads and Black women aren't. Like, that's where I keep talking about sincerity, right? If white men have a sincerity about wanting it to be a just world for women, for queer folks, for Black folks, for Indigenous folks, if they have a sincerity about wanting that, then they should want to do what it will take to get there, which means dismantling the system that gives them benefits that it denies to other people. And so, yeah, so it's about, is that word dismantle, it's not about them as human beings, it's about the system. And if they truly are on our team, if they truly want to, there's a song where it says, you know, the train of justice is coming through, you better get on board or get run down. You know, it's like, you're welcome to get on board. You know, there's a place for you and we need you. I think that what happens is, because white people and especially white men are used to doing all the talking and having everybody listen to and obey them, when they come into a space and somebody tells them they can't be talking, they can't be leading, they think, well, I have no place here because we don't know how to do anything but be in charge. And it's like, they didn't say you have no place here. They didn't say they don't want you. They didn't say they don't need you. They said they don't need you to tell them what to do. But people leave and they say, well, they didn't want me. They rejected me. I tried to help. I try to help and I'll never try again. And it's like, they want you, they need you, but they need you in the way that's useful, not in the way that, because if white people enter anti-racist spaces and then they take over and they want to lead, they want to make the decisions, they want to set the agenda, well, then you've taken an anti-racist space and made it white supremacist again, because it's white people in charge again. Like, it can't be an anti-racist space if we're in charge. And so our role in this space, like, you hear me, I'm talking so much tonight, right? I have words and words and words. If I'm in a Black space, I'm actually quiet. You would be surprised at how different my presentation is, because I'm not in that space. I'm not an expert on anything. So I think that, like, the ways that we show up, and that's why Black women accept me in the space, because I understand my role. My role is to listen and learn from them, and then go talk to you guys and say, like, hey, let's save them some labor. I can explain some of this stuff to you, and then, like, when you go into their space, you won't have to learn it the hard way, and then it'll help you and it'll help them, and we'll all be happier. So yeah, they say that, like, I had a boss once who said, like, sometimes you just throw a pine cone out and see who catches it. And whoever, if it's for them, they'll catch it and they'll say, ouch. What that means is, like, if I put out something that says, dear white men, we really need you to stop trying to take over everything, right? The white man who responds and tries to put me in my place and get in my DMs or in the comments, right? He's the one who caught the pine cone because it applied to him. And he says, ouch, right? The white man who agrees with me, who's like, yeah, Hannah, he's probably going to be just quiet, or he might like it or whatever, right? He doesn't catch the pine cone because he knows it wasn't meant for him, because he already agrees. And so, I think that that's the thing. Like, when we use harsh language, we're throwing out a pine cone and seeing who says ouch. And if you don't get defensive, then you've probably already learned the lesson and you're already on the team.
Is it okay if I ask one more real quick? Because it was on this list and I thought it was interesting. To imagine grace and justice as two people sitting at a table, what do they have to say to each other? Grace, the Methodist buzzword. And just how does grace factor in?
Yeah. This is actually I think that grace to me is, being given something that we don't deserve, right? And I think that when I imagined grace and justice sitting down at the table together, I thought about how grace wants to say to justice, false grace. So false grace. I'm going to say false grace because Martin Luther King very much used the language of false peace and true peace, that false peace is the absence of tension and true peace is the presence of justice, which sometimes takes tension to get there, right? So I'm going to use false grace and true grace. So false grace, sitting at the table with justice, would be the book Anatomy of Peace, which our denomination asked all the leadership to read, which I've been contemplating on this week, and which I think is a modern Willie Lynch letter, which is meant to break the spirits of Black women in institutional spaces. And I think the book is evil, and I'm going to write about it again. But false grace says to justice, makes demands of justice. False grace wants to wants to demand of justice reconciliation, wants to demand a pacifying of the cry of justice, wants to say, I know I deserve these consequences for my actions, but don't give them to me, right? I think true grace is a recognition that, like, only we cannot, grace has to be given by, what grace will look like has to be decided and given by the person giving it, right? It can't be demanded. So, like, I think false grace is kind of interrupting the conversation and saying, I, as the oppressor, demand that justice is quiet and is nicer to me. But true grace, that thing that we don't deserve, I think can only be offered. It can't be demanded by the oppressor. It has to be offered by the one who has been wronged, right? And in that sense, I think oftentimes we are being given grace, but we don't want to receive it. And what that grace looks like sometimes is correction, is sometimes the very cry for justice itself is grace. I just got back from Guatemala, and I was talking with a group of Black academics over dinner, and I was talking about Cristo Negro, which is this sacred site in El Salvador, where there is a Christ made of ebony. And I'm just coming back from having spoken Spanish for months, right? And so it didn't feel awkward for me to be saying Cristo Negro because I'd been speaking Spanish in Guatemala for months. But for them, they were like, you know, we're really offended, and by it makes us really uncomfortable that you're saying the word negro. And they explained to me that they were offering me grace, because they said, if we didn't care about you, we wouldn't correct you. We would roll our eyes at each other when you weren't looking, and we would never invite you to dinner again. The fact that we're telling you what you did wrong is grace, and it means that we care about you. And so a lot of times we want grace to be something that doesn't make us feel bad about ourselves. But you can understand how, like, true love wants the best for us. True love wants us to change and to be our best and most useful self. And sometimes it hurts. And sometimes we might experience hard and painful things that don't feel like grace. But it's actually grace, because if we're not offered the correction that we need, then we are left to stay the same and not to grow. And that's actually, that's what we deserve. That's what we deserve. We deserve for people not to put any effort into us, right? Grace is when they put effort into us. And so I think that grace and justice are actually involved with one another. And I think that we want to set them up across the table as opponents, that, like, you know, like, here's justice, and it's making these demands of people that are going to make them sacrifice and cost them something. And across the table, grace is like, oh, be nice, don't, you know, right? But in reality, they're a team. The cry for justice and for us to be a better world and better people is actually a form of grace in not leaving us to our own devices, and calling us to something better and kinder.
So grace and justice are that pair that go out and they sit at a booth, but they sit on the same side.
Yeah. So, like,
some people do that.
Yeah, Marianne and I would be grace and justice. Like, I would be like, you know how Obama had on SNL, they had Obama with the anger translator? Like, Marianne and I would sit down and I'd explain everything justice style, and then she'd be like, now the reason why you need to understand this is, you know, we just like work as a team. And I think that's why we need each other at the end.
Well, actually, I know I said that there was one more question left, but there is another one that just came through, and I think it's really worth asking. So again, if you have to jump off the call, go with grace. So this question is, how do we know when we've succeeded in dismantling the white supremacist system? And once it's dismantled, what do we build instead?
Oh, so first of all, I'm going to tell you something really hard, which is that we are probably not going to live to get to see that. A lot of us. And yet we still have to fight for it until the day we die. So I think that Black folks wake up in America, they're born in America in discomfort, and they will have to fight for their survival from the moment they're born until the moment they die. And so I think that we also ought to be fighting for their survival from the moment we live till the moment we die, if we're true family. we're really walking in solidarity, even if we don't see that day come. But I mean, that's the hard reality, is we have to fight for something that our descendants will get to experience, right? And like, so that's one thing. But let's imagine a more hopeful world. Let's live in Octavia Butler's world, right? How will we know that we have dismantled white supremacy? I think we'll know that we've dismantled white supremacy when I think within the church world, when Black folks get called in to our churches to teach us about church finance and safe sanctuaries rather than about racism, when we look at people of color in our communities as people who have all these breadth of expertise to offer, rather than as people who can solve our problem of lack of diversity. I think that when your likelihood of getting appointed to a large church or to a large salary is equal as a Black woman than as a white man, which we know it's not, right? I don't think that, I think I'm hopeful about this rising generation. I think that they see the world differently, and that they are not taking as much, BS. Very hopeful about the people that I see my nieces and nephews as being. And at the same time, I know the power of our systems, and that it takes a lot more than like memes on social media. It takes this kind of intentionality about denying opportunities and privileges, sacrificing and suffering. And I think they will have to grow into adulthood to show whether they're able to do that. It's very different than performing on social media, which is the majority of the opportunity that Generation Z has right now. They haven't had to make those choices about that cost in a different way. And so I think that but I'm very, very hopeful, very excited about who they are. And so maybe we'll push further ahead. I think that in moments like this, where it feels like it's over, when it feels like, well, everybody's putting Black Lives Matter on their football fields and like on their helmets and blah, 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 right? And it's like, do you really think that these rich white men that run the world and that own all these football teams just suddenly magically had such a change of heart that now they're fine with their players writing Breonna Taylor on their helmets and they're going to paint Black Lives Matter on their fields because of some sincere change of heart, right? For a lot of people, they feel like things are over and everything's changed. But for those of us who've been in the trenches for a long time, it's kind of a scary moment, because we're like, what is really going on here? Because it's not what it looks like. And, we've seen this before. We've seen cities change name a street in every city, Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, the way that they're going to name Black Lives Matter Boulevard in every city in the country. But did that change the injustice and the poverty on those streets? Right? So we've been here before. And so I think that this is a moment where it's like, people are waking up in a new and a different level than they ever have before, and Confederate statues are coming down, and it's incredibly exciting. And at the same time, we have to lean into it and not for a moment think that we've arrived, merely that we've woken up. And so what's the world that we should create? I think, I guess, I mean, this is just I just want Black women to be in charge of everything. I just want, that's just my personal thing. That's my personal thing. But I actually think that to be, not tongue in cheek, I actually think that womanism is the answer, because womanism is Black women's response to feminism. So when the feminist movement, it recruited Black women, et cetera, right? But then when Black men got the vote and before white women, then people were like, well, then white women got pissed, right? And their racism showed up. And so, it's been clear that, that feminism was leaned towards white women, right? And so womanism was a response that arose that said, you can't move forward by pushing anybody else down. So I do think, you know, in all seriousness, the reason why I want a world where Black women are in charge is because I trust their leadership. I was at a retreat with college students a couple of years ago, and there was this weird experiment where like they would like randomly distribute a certain amount of resources to different people, and then like you kind of trade. It was like a game and a race and all this different stuff all together, right? But the point is that we did multiple rounds of this game, but in one of the rounds, like there's a table that has like all this food and all these snacks and water and stuff, right? And then there's other circles where it's like 5 people at the table with all these resources, right? And then like 20 people in the big circle with like a granola bar and a glass of water. And then like 30 people, you know, it's one of those kind of things, right? And at one of the rounds, somehow, by coincidence, all 5 people at the table with all the resources were women of color. And in every other round of the game, people were like, you know, like flaunting their resources and being like, look at us drinking our soda while you only have water, right? But in that round where all 5 women at the table happened to be women of color, the first thing they said was like, okay, so how do we divide this up amongst everybody in the room? And that to me, it was like this accidental thing that the planner of the exercise hadn't even planned or expected, right? And they kind of like sabotaged the experiment, right? They sabotaged what was supposed to happen by acting like womanists, by saying like nobody moves forward by pushing anybody else down. And so I do think that, you know, I say I want Black women to be in charge of everything, but what I really mean is I want the womanist mindset to be our mindset, and that's for that to be the world that we live in, where we don't try to move forward by pushing anybody else down. That's a collaborative world, not a competitive world, where resources aren't hoarded. You know, we're seeing all these examples of how we are losing perspective on the amount of money that billionaires have, right? Like that billionaire isn't just millionaire with one more zero. It's like a whole other league, right? And that nobody should, that's not the, I think we should have a world without billionaires and probably without millionaires either. And that's not like communist or socialist, that's just Christian. That's just reality. Like, that's just like, there is no way on earth that Jesus would be happy about that. Like, that's just Christianity. Yeah, womanism, no more millionaires. There you go.
Well, and that's like oh, sorry, I was gonna say, and that's just like all these businesses posting like Black Lives Matter, and I'm like, you don't really believe that, because if you did, you would not be exploiting Indonesian workers, and we would not be, you know, like selling bananas in the US for as cheap as we do, because we've exploited these countries and started coups, and like, you know, we wouldn't be having children mine our mica in Africa. Like you don't actually believe that, or your shareholders would lose money. Like,
right. And I think that's why it's important for us to keep those words, Black Lives Matter, rooted within the movement of Black Lives Matter, because a lot of times you hear people very much now, as you know, as we've gotten over the initial adrenaline surge and we're starting to be more honest, you know, people trying to separate like Black Lives Matter from the words from Black Lives Matter, the movement, and like, oh well, but I'm not like them, like, and you know, and like Dana said, like if you were rooted in the movement, then you would mean the words, and the words would apply in that way, that like she said. But if you're just saying the words because they're popular to say, then yeah, they're gonna lose their meaning. And it's so ironic. It's so ironic when we've spent so many years fighting people who were thinking that we shouldn't say the words at all, and now they're like the popular hip thing to do. It's traumatic. And just one thing on those lines, Liz, I did a call last week with the young women who were college students at Prairie View A&M, where Sandra was arrested, and I did a call and a conversation with them. And I have to be quite honest, it was so hard to hear like the confusion and the grief that they were dealing with in trying to understand how they were somehow being sidelined in a movement that they had sacrificed and risked their lives for. And the confusion that they were feeling about all these people that were suddenly like saying these words, and but they didn't mean them. And there's trauma for those of us who've been in the trenches. There's trauma in watching all these new people come in and take over who don't really even mean the words and who don't understand the movement. And not only that, but who've been fighting the movement for so long, but now that it's become popular are like, you know, like, oh, us too. Like, and it's like 2 weeks ago you were fighting me on this. So I think that like listening to those women and their grief and their confusion, like it was really hard for me. It was really hard for me to listen to these young Black women and the pain that they were feeling and the trauma of watching people make a mockery of something that they risked their lives for.
Well, to your thoughts on womenism, just another plug for September 8th, we have Dean Lovelace, Vanessa Lovelace, who you had mentioned, Dr. Will Gaffney. Dean Lovelace had co-edited a book of womanist essays that Will Gaffney's piece shows up in. So Dean Lovelace is really stellar, and she'll be talking with us about how to be an anti-racist and bring that mindset to our reading of the Bible from a womanist perspective. So really excited to have her on the 8th of September. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
As we're thinking about like what it means to be an anti-racist, I would just say like we don't get to define that. Like I would just say like I would like encourage you to keep your eyes and your ears focused on how do people who experience racism define it, and what do they need, and what are they demanding from us, and that is what we must do. Like it's I saw this great meme that was like, anti-racism work isn't like self-help work for white people so that they can do something that'll make them feel better about themselves. Like we're really trying to stop Black people from being killed. And so I think that, yeah, just keeping focused on the fact that like this isn't something that we as white people can master and become an expert in, and then like reestablish ourselves as the expert. We will never be the expert. We will die not being the expert. Like, but we still have to learn, not so that we can use that knowledge as power to reassert our power and our superiority and our expertness, but we learn to be useful. And I think that kind of brings us back to like why you invited me to talk tonight. So there we learn, like, and our sincere goal is to be useful.